The Zelver Dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. Their empires spanned over 1,000 worlds, their fleets unmatched, their armies undefeated. Lesser species had fallen before them, bending the knee or vanishing into extinction. When their scouts discovered Earth, they did not see a threat, only another primitive world to be conquered. The War Council gathered in the Imperial Chambers, a vast hall where the fate of civilizations was decided. Grand Strategist Zelvorin examined the reports, his mandibles clicking in amusement. Humans are warlike, he admitted, but they are reckless, unrefined. Their history is filled with conflict, yet their technology is barely capable of interstellar travel. They are nothing more than a nuisance. The Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming. Then we will take them swiftly. No drawn-out campaigns, no unnecessary bloodshed. Offer them the standard ultimatum, surrender and serve, or resist and perish. The message was broadcast across Earth. It was not a negotiation but a decree. The Dominion's fleets hovered above the planet, their weapons primed. You will submit to Zelver rule, the transmission declared, or you will be eradicated. The response was immediate. A unified rejection from Earth's leaders, a defiant refusal to bow. Humanity did not beg. They did not plead. They prepared for war. The first strikes were clinical. Orbital bombardments reduced military installations to rubble. Satellites were destroyed, communications disrupted, supply chains severed. The Zelver descended like gods, their soldiers clad in shimmering armor, wielding weapons that could vaporize a man in an instant. They expected a swift and orderly subjugation. They were wrong. The first engagements were misleading. Human forces fell back, their defenses crumbling under superior firepower. But even in retreat, they fought. Cities became fortresses. Every street, every building, a battlefield. The Zelver pushed forward, but every inch was bought with blood. Resistance movements emerged in every nation. Fighters who refused to surrender, soldiers who adapted with terrifying speed. They scavenged Zelver weapons, reverse engineering them in days. The invaders expected fear. Instead, they found fury. Then, the first real shock came. A Zelver battalion, well-equipped and experienced, was sent to crush a resistance cell in what was once New York City. They vanished. No distress calls, no transmissions, only silence. A recon unit was deployed to investigate. They found the remains of the battalion, but not as expected. Zelver corpses were left in a precise pattern, a message carved into the steel walls of the ruined cityscape. Welcome to hell. Panic set in. This was not normal resistance. This was something else. Something calculated. Zelver commanders convened in urgency. They could not understand it. No species had ever fought them like this. Others had resisted, but never with such cunning, such brutality. The humans did not just fight to survive. They fought to win. The Dominion, for the first time in centuries, faced uncertainty. The Emperor himself addressed the commanders. They are still primitives, he insisted. Their history of war means nothing. We have conquered greater foes. But the war had only just begun. And humanity had yet to show them what they were truly capable of. Zelver High Command demanded answers. The war was supposed to be over before it began, yet resistance only intensified. Entire divisions vanished in urban combat, their technology seized, their tactics countered. It was impossible. No species adapted this fast. In desperation, Supreme Intelligence Officer Kalevax was tasked with studying human history. If knowledge was power, then understanding the enemy might provide a solution. What he found shook him to his core. Humanity had been at war with itself for thousands of years. Their history was not one of peace occasionally interrupted by violence, but of violence occasionally interrupted by peace. The wars of the Zelver Dominion were waged over centuries, careful and calculated, with clear rules of engagement. But humans? Humans waged war, like predators hunting prey. Empires rose and fell in mere decades. The Mongols swept across continents, leaving only ash in their wake. The Romans forged an empire through conquest and slaughter. The world wars consumed millions of lives, fought on every front, with no quarter given. And then there were the nuclear bombings. Kalevax replayed the footage over and over, unable to process it. The Zelver had weapons that could destroy planets, but they had never used them. Even their most ruthless campaigns had limits. But humans? They had burned entire cities, not against alien invaders, but against their own kind. This was not a species that feared war. This was a species built for it. Kalevax rushed to the Emperor's chamber, reports clutched in shaking hands. The council listened in silence as he detailed humanity's wars, their strategies, their utter disregard for limitations. The Zelver fought to win battles. Humans fought to end enemies. These are savages, a general scoffed. They are brutes, nothing more. Kalevax shook his head. They are survivors. And they are already turning this war against us. Reports flooded in. Human tactics were shifting with alarming speed. Guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, deception. They were fighting dirty, and it was working. Entire battalions fell to invisible enemies. Human soldiers blended into the terrain, using traps, snipers, misinformation. Zelver soldiers, accustomed to structured warfare, fell into ambush after ambush. Supply lines were cut. Energy weapons were sabotaged. Troops refused to sleep, fearing the whispers in the dark. Captured humans, when interrogated, only smiled. You should have read our history first. It was no longer a war. It was a hunt. And the Zelver had just realized they were the prey. Zelver forces were unraveling. The war had turned into something they could no longer control. Every attempt to subdue humanity was met with something far worse than resistance: adaptation. The first assaults had been swift victories, but now, the very cities they had conquered became death traps. Entire squads were disappearing overnight. Soldiers would step into abandoned buildings and never come out. Patrols sent to investigate found nothing but eerie silence and bloodstains. Surveillance drones picked up fragmented footage, shadows moving in the dark, figures striking and vanishing in an instant. It wasn't just organized military forces anymore. Civilians had joined the fight, crafting explosives from scraps, using terrain as a weapon, luring Zelver troops into ambushes with terrifying efficiency. The Zelver had crushed rebellions before, but never like this. There was no central leadership to dismantle, no infrastructure to disable. Humanity didn't break, they improvised. They fought with whatever they had, turning desperation into strategy. Zelver generals ordered heavier bombardments, but even that failed. Humans had learned how to weaponize destruction itself. Cities were burned down, not by the invaders, but by their own defenders, forcing the Zelver to fight in the ruins. Strategic retreats weren't acts of surrender, but calculated moves, luring the enemy deeper into hostile territory. The Zelver weren't taking land. They were walking into traps. Their advanced technology, once their greatest strength, had become a liability. EMPs disabled their energy weapons, forcing them into brutal close-quarters combat, where humans thrived. Zelver soldiers, untrained in melee warfare, were torn apart by improvised weapons, their own gear used against them. They had expected a conventional war, but humanity had given them something else. A nightmare. The reports were incomprehensible. Zelver divisions, numbering in the thousands, were simply gone. Entire command centers, wiped out in coordinated night raids. The term ghost forces began circulating among the ranks, human units that struck without warning, slaughtered entire battalions, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. Panic spread through the Dominion's ranks. Zelver soldiers refused to patrol alone. They spoke of whispers in the dark, of unseen enemies watching them from the rubble, of comrades dragged away screaming in the night. Morale collapsed. Hardened warriors, veterans of 1,000 battles, now flinched at the sound of wind through broken buildings. The War Council convened in secret, away from the Emperor's ears. Their confidence had shattered. Humanity wasn't just resisting, they were learning. And the Zelver? They were running out of time. Desertions began. Elite forces abandoned their posts, fleeing the planet in stolen ships. Commanders found themselves isolated, their requests for reinforcements ignored. The Empire had never faced a war like this, not against an enemy who refused to lose. The Emperor, still blinded by arrogance, refused to acknowledge the truth. He demanded one final push, a full-scale assault to crush Earth's resistance once and for all. The last great fleet was deployed, thousands of warships descending upon the planet in an overwhelming show of force. But it was already too late. The moment the fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, humanity struck back. Not with desperation, not with panic, but with cold, calculated destruction. Zelver's ships fell from the sky, sabotaged before they even reached the battlefield. Cities that had seemed abandoned suddenly lit up with artillery fire, missiles raining down with pinpoint accuracy. Then came the worst revelation of all. Humanity had infiltrated the Dominion itself. On occupied worlds, uprisings ignited simultaneously. Zelver-controlled colonies rebelled, their own people turning against them. Supply chains collapsed. The Empire's communication networks were hacked, broadcasting a single message across the Dominion. You never had a chance. The final battle never happened. There was no glorious last stand, no desperate push. There was only defeat. The once mighty Zelver war machine, undefeated for millennia, was dismantled piece by piece. And humanity? Humanity was just getting started. The Zelver Dominion collapsed faster than anyone could have predicted. Their empire, built on centuries of conquest, was now crumbling under the weight of a single, catastrophic mistake. They had underestimated humanity. What was supposed to be an easy victory had turned into an extinction-level catastrophe for their species. Zelver forces, once feared across the stars, were now in full retreat. It wasn't an organized withdrawal, it was a rout. High-ranking officials abandoned their posts, scrambling for any way to escape. Some tried to negotiate, offering surrender terms. Humanity rejected them all. There would be no peace talks, no compromises. The Zelver hadn't offered mercy, and they would receive none in return. Across occupied planets, rebellion spread like wildfire. The Zelver's former vassal species, long oppressed, saw Earth's defiance and rose up in kind. What had once been an empire of 1,000 worlds was now a collection of war zones, each one tearing itself apart. The Dominion wasn't just losing the war, it was dying. Desperation set in among the ruling elite. The Emperor himself, once an untouchable figure, now found his palace under siege, not by human forces, but by his own people. The High Council splintered. Some fled into exile. Others, realizing what was coming, chose to end their own lives rather than fall into human hands. And then, when the Dominion was at its weakest, humanity delivered the final blow. They didn't just take the war to the Zelver homeworld. They erased it. No grand invasion, no occupation. Humanity had no interest in ruling over their fallen enemy. They had studied Zelver tactics, learned how their society functioned, and then they shut it down. Orbital bombardments targeted critical infrastructure, reducing entire cities to rubble. Communications were severed, energy grids disabled, food supplies cut off. The Zelver found themselves in the same position they had put countless others in before them, powerless, broken, left to die. And humanity didn't stop there. With the Dominion shattered, the survivors expected Earth to return to isolation, to claim victory and retreat into their own borders. But that wasn't what happened. Humanity had learned something in this war. They had always been fighters, but now, for the first time in history, they were united. No longer just a single species defending its home, they had become something else. A force that could not be ignored. A power that would not be challenged. An empire built not on conquest, but on the absolute refusal to be conquered. The galaxy took notice. What had once been dismissed as an insignificant world was now the most feared power in the known universe. Every surviving empire, every alien race, now understood the truth. You do not wage war against humanity, because if you do, you will not survive it. The galaxy would never be the same. The war between the Zelver Dominion and humanity had rewritten the balance of power in ways no one had foreseen. What had once been an invincible empire was now nothing more than scattered remnants, barely clinging to survival. But for humanity, this was only the beginning. They had not just won a war. They had transcended it. In the aftermath of the conflict, the surviving species of the galaxy turned their eyes toward Earth, not as a target, but as something far more terrifying. A force that had reshaped the rules of warfare itself. The Zelver had believed themselves to be the ultimate conquerors, but they had never encountered an enemy that refused to surrender, that learned and adapted faster than anything they had ever seen. Humanity had taken the best the Dominion had to offer and turned it into their own weapon. They had fought not just with firepower, but with strategy, patience, and sheer ruthlessness. Other empires, once distant and uninterested in Earth, now scrambled to reassess their stance. Treaties were rewritten, alliances formed, border disputes abandoned out of fear. No species dared to provoke humanity now, not after what they had done to the Dominion. But humanity did not seek vengeance beyond what was necessary. They had no interest in mindless conquest, no desire to replace the Zelver as galactic overlords. Instead, they did something even more unpredictable. They expanded, but not through war. The ruins of the Dominion were swiftly repurposed. Human engineers took abandoned worlds and rebuilt them, not as colonies of conquest, but as fortresses, trade hubs, and diplomatic centers. They invited other species, including former Zelver subjugates, to join them, not as vassals, but as partners. For the first time in galactic history, power was shifting not through the blade, but through choice. And yet, everyone knew what would happen if that choice was ever threatened again. Humanity had made their stance clear. They would not rule by force. But if anyone dared to challenge them, if anyone thought Earth was still just another world to be taken, they would burn just as the Zelver had. A new era had begun. One where humanity was no longer just another species in the void. They were the ones who decided what came next.